My son is biracial. He is black and white. And he lives in a house full of white people. The person he calls dad is also white. That is his father. That is who has raised him since he was a baby. He is now 7. If you are biracial or African American and you have the time, please watch this and leave any feedback you might have, because I don't know what to do. So my son looked at me and said, serious as a heart attack, he said, "I wish I was white with straight hair." And it floored me. And I said, "What did you say to me?" And he said, "I wish I was white with straight hair, Mom. What do I do to do that?" And I started crying immediately, because on what earth does my baby boy feel like he's different or should be white when he is fucking beautiful? I mean, my son is beautiful, okay? And he said, excuse me, we live in a county where it is predominantly white. We live in the South as well, so it's country. Not a lot of biracial children or black children in his school. Very few. So he said, everybody at school is white. Some have curly hair, but they're all white. They all look the same. They're all alike. Everybody in the house is white. They're alike. But I'm this boring brown color. And I think that's why nobody likes me. I said to him, "You are perfect. God made you the way he made you because you are a beautiful brown boy who should love himself. You are beautiful." And he said to me, "Mom, you don't get it. You're white. I'm brown." And that's when I realized that as a white mother of a biracial child, I can't be there for him on some things. I can be there as much as I can, but he knows I don't understand. And what the saddest thing about this is that I've never taught my son about racism. I haven't had to yet. And I haven't. And I should have probably before, but I haven't. And I haven't taught him about anything. So he learned racism on his own and is ashamed of what he looks like. And that is the sad fucking fact of all of this. So please help me if you can. Thank you.
Very, very, very touching video from a woman who has a biracial child. Now, of course, biracial means composed of 2 or more races. Typically, when somebody says biracial, they're just referring to 2, though. But nowadays, people are a soup of different things. So, but her son has just had a seemingly difficult conversation with his mother around race, to explain to her that not only does he wish that he was white with straight hair, but to communicate to her that she doesn't understand his experience because she is not brown skinned. Now, I know this is a little bit of a triggering conversation, but try to remain and be respectful, not disrespectful, but respectful in engaging in this conversation. The first thing is, most people would say that you should have an understanding of other cultures prior to being involved with those cultures and raising a child that is perceived to come from a particular culture that is not related to one that you come from or have experience with. And it's a little bit of a difficult conversation because when it comes to having children, there's a lot of things that are difficult to anticipate. You couldn't possibly know the effect that your decision will have on your child and what that would look like. But there are some things to be mindful of. Case in point, if you are an African American dealing with someone who's non-African American, and this is not something that you should shun or have an issue with, but you should understand it. And it may feel like it's a component that we don't need to understand, but as you can see, based off of this clip coming from this mother, it is something to sit up and take notice to. The African American experience is, in my opinion, like no other culture's experience for more than a couple of reasons. Yes, because the culture is different, but also the life experience is different. We tend to have a little bit of difficulty around validating the experience that someone has when they're African American. There are a lot of situations perceivably uncomfortable and negative experiences just because you were African American. Now, a lot of people that are born and raised, African American or Black would argue that this is a reason why, if they have a preference to create children with someone who is coming from the same race, this would be a big reason as to why. Because a lot of people who come from that same background tend to view it as, we understand the experience of the African American or the Black person. You see what I'm saying? So typically you'll see men and women say that they would prefer to talk to someone coming from the same culture because of situations like this. Now, it doesn't mean that she has done anything wrong. It doesn't mean that this is something that you should shy away from. But if you're going to, or you have this level of attraction that could create a situation where your child is a mix of two different polar opposite cultures and experiences in life, this is something to consider. Because if the relationship does not work out and your child is with the parent who does not have that similar complexion and or experience, you have to be proficient in the knowledge in relating to that experience, because eventually you will have the conversation. There are a lot of mothers who have biracial children that cannot teach them how to do their own hair, do not understand why these products are beneficial for their hair, do not understand their body's development at the rate that they develop, do not understand that different diet also plays a factor because of the cultural requirements specific to their DNA, that by association, that certain people coming from certain cultures, the fact that they're melanated, they are encouraged to have a different diet than someone who is not, for their health's sake as well. And when you ignore the idea or feel that it may not be necessary to do the research and have that level of understanding, this can be a very uncomfortable conversation to have with your own child. Children who, of any race, need to see representation of themselves, not only within their parents, within their family, but within their life's experience. This mother just stated not only is her child biracial, but the father that is raising him is not his biological father, because this is a white male as well. And for him to be biracial, his father would have to be a different race. Now, I'm assuming, of course, that the father is Black, contributing to why her son is biracial. So assuming that they did not work out, now her son is being raised by an all Caucasian family. In the neighborhood where they live, she also says there aren't many brown-skinned children at his school, not even in his community. So when you grow up in a situation where you are the anomaly, you do start to consider if there's something wrong with you. This is an element of parenting that most parents do not have to confront in a lot of cases, because they typically tend to be the same race as their child. But when you start to get into having alternate experiences as far as, having parents that are two different religions, having parents that are two different races, having parents that have two different, belief systems. You tend to put a line through the foundation because now your child has to figure out what they identify with. And if you're talking about race and you are not the parent that they look like they are as it relates to race, they will feel a level of separation from you because your experience in this same environment does not match theirs. So unfortunately, a biracial son may have to confront conversations with parents saying, this is how I was treated at school. And hear your parents say, that's something that doesn't exist, or that's something that I can't relate to, or are you sure that that's what happened? And everything is not about race. And when you have to confront that type of conversation with your child, it's hard not to ask if it isn't best to be parented by a parent who has the same experience for this same reason. Now, giving her advice, because she does sound like a loving mother that wants to understand and create a safe space for her son to have a realistic experience that she can validate, that she can relate to and support, and also just be there to acknowledge that there is actually a real difference here that needs to be discussed. She's asking for assistance, and that would be my recommendation. He needs to see more representation that looks like him. And unfortunately, in this situation, if someone else that is not his father is raising him and also coming from the same culture as you, that may prove a little bit difficult. And the reason why I say it may prove to be a little bit difficult is because this representation that he needs in his life needs to be a consistent thing. So I don't know what the situation is with his father, but I would suggest trying to mend that wound so he can have his father in his life, therefore his father's family. And then he can not only get a representation for himself, he can connect to his roots and have people that have the same experience that he does talk with him, support him, and give him understanding and clarity as it relates to his own experience in this life. Because understand that he is biracial, which means you cannot turn away from half of his experience because he is a composition of the Caucasian experience as well as the African American experience. So we're not going to say that you should just throw yourself to the side. You don't belong part of this equation. Send him to his father, because he has to have an understanding of both parts of himself, not just the part that represents his skin complexion, but the part of himself that is identified in both cultures, because he still has to work out what he likes, what he doesn't like, what's a clear representation of who he is and what is not. And you have to support him in being able to hold that conversation, because unfortunately you can't control how he's going to see himself. There are a lot of parents who come from a Caucasian descent that have biracial children that come out with a complexion that does not look like them, and then their child does not even want to identify with coming from that half of the contribution to their DNA, and that can be perceived to be hurtful. And when you think about it as a parent, you don't want your child denying the part of themselves that you represent, because you contribute a part of yourself to that child as well. But there's no way for you to know. You may have a child that may hate the part of themselves that is represented by the absent parent, and it can go either way. It's all dictated by their experience, their environment, and the people that help them connect to themselves and their identity. We have to understand these cultures before we put ourselves smack dab in the middle of it and say, We're all just people, because that is a truth at the baseline. But in reality, we all have different experiences, and it very much is dictated by race. Now, I want to give a huge round of applause for this mother creating this avenue of conversation, because a lot of people and a lot of women who are in this situation, and not the African American representation of the biracial child, may tap into their ego and their pride and not want to admit that there's just so much that they didn't know about the melanated experience, that they thought they can handle it on their own until it was a conversation that they weren't ready to have. I've had women who are African American have that conversation, even within their own race as well. So it's not something that cannot happen to anybody, because children spot the differences. I had a friend of mine who was darker skin complected, and she had a son who was very light and closer to my skin complexion, and he felt a way and had to have that conversation with his mom about why he does not look like her as it relates to his skin complexion. And his father wasn't necessarily a part of his life as well, because he did not have that representation to say, I don't have your skin tone, but I have my father's skin tone. So when you're in a situation like that and you have an upbringing where you're surrounded by people who don't look like you, you automatically start trying to calculate, why am I here then? How are these people genuinely my family? How can I relate to them? How do they see me? I don't look like you guys. You guys don't look like me. Not only do we have different skin complexions, but we have different features. You see what I'm saying? I don't have any of you guys' eyes. I don't have your hair texture. I don't have your ears. I have no one's lips. I have no one's eyes. And when you have to have that type of conversation within yourself, it makes you feel like you belong nowhere. And adults deal with that on a crazy scale, because they feel it will destroy you on a level of being an adult. Imagine what it does to the psychology of a child. Unfortunately, in this situation, he does need representation that looks like him. And it may be best to seek out his father, so he can not only get to know his father, but his extended family, and spend time with these people so he can understand the other half of the contribution to his life. Unfortunately, even though we know these aren't things or outcomes that are done on purpose, these situations are something that I feel really need to be taken into consideration genuinely, because you don't have a guarantee that the relationship will in fact work out. And you may be in a situation to where you end up with full custody of the child, and trying to get this child to get acclimated to an environment that does not represent how they look at all. And it can sound confusing when you yourself cannot relate to a different culture's experience. You do have people that have a tendency to say we're all human beings, and that's the way a person should be treated. And teaching that at the baseline is a beautiful thing to teach, because it allows your child to not treat people different because of their perceived differences, whether it be skin tone or otherwise. But the reality is, even if you teach your child that, society barely recognizes that as a truthful thing to reflect our societal views. Unfortunately, society says that it's very important to know what race you are. It's very important to know what culture you come from. It's very important to know how you're received in the world, because unfortunately, what people don't realize, unless you have this everyday experience, is that being a melanated person, being classified as African American, Black, Negro, if you have that classification, there is already a negative connotation on it already. That is before they get to see you, before they get to hear you, before they get to experience you. Now, if you don't know any better or you weren't taught any better and you follow that up with the classic stereotypical behavior that the world says this particular classification of people is known to represent themselves as, then you will get profiled and expected to show yourself in the way that people see on TV, that people see in movies. And sometimes you're not given a fair shot to represent yourself. And that is the part that people don't understand prior to creating life with that experience. I understand that from the outside looking in, it looks like just a cry for attention, but this is something that genuinely exists, and it doesn't just exist between races, it exists within this culture, just between the different skin complexions as well. Again, I want to take the time to salute this woman for being a good heart, because there are lots of situations like this where the parents are not concerned about the difference in the experience. They just expect the child to conform and not really taking time to notice that you're only half of the contribution to who this child is, and they do need to understand both sides before you tell them who they are, is a big deal. The fact that she understood that it is true, she does not share that her son's experience. She understood that her son does in fact share a home with all individuals that look like her instead of looking like him and her. And she realizes that even though she may have created a loving home for her son, there is still a space within him that is void, vacant, and yearning to be fulfilled, but unfortunately maybe beyond her reach as far as her ability to fill that for him. He is going to need some type of representation. I sincerely hope that you are at least on speaking terms with his father, because that is the best option for him to understand himself. You may be able to get a substitute, like a teacher or a coach, someone that he can be with on a consistent basis, but trust me, there is no replacement for the biological parent. And so hopefully you have that connection so you can start asking him about wanting to see his father, or at least conversing over the phone to see his father. You know, I don't know if he's seen pictures and stuff already. You did say that this man that lives with you has been raising him for majority of his life. So I don't know if he has been exposed to pictures of his father to even see if there is a resemblance that may satisfy his curiosity. But it's very important to understand not only that you love a person, but the culture that they come from. Because if anything happens to them in their absence, whether it be voluntary or involuntary, you are responsible for making sure they have a piece of that culture and that representation consistently a part of their life. Even though they may not any longer be physically present, it is still necessary for a child to see themselves represented in their everyday life, because it helps them establish confidence and love for themselves. Not only that, but appreciation for the composition within them and what came from who and what to be confident in and proud of. As far as my followers, please try your best to be respectful and understanding. The thought that this can ensue a conversation around telling someone who they should and shouldn't talk to is just exhibiting entirely too much control and, for a lack of better words, hate. And that's not what I'm trying to communicate here. I'm trying to communicate that it's very important not only to know the person that you're with, but to know their culture, their mannerisms, their experience, and respect and understand it. Because what you are choosing when you choose a partner to create life with, half of that experience is going to become a part of your child. And if you don't acknowledge that, if you don't understand and respect that, You won't put any effort into that part that needs to have a representation live and in person for your child. You will assume that you can love it away, that you can explain it away, that you can avoid it away or omit it. And they will constantly search. If you won't answer their questions and really give them a significant and valuable explanation for the questions that they're asking, they will seek it out on their own. And you never know what they will find during that search. And it may reflect poorly on you or anyone else. When you have an opportunity to have a conversation, a serious conversation with your child, take that opportunity to have that conversation because it is necessary. And we tend to assume that when we're having children, that the decision that we make, the person that we choose to help us with this art of creation, we don't need them past that moment. So sometimes we get careless and ignorant to the facts when we violate the home and end the relationship. Of course, I don't know her background. It might have been something completely valid and he was in violation of her, and it could have been something completely casual. This is now me speaking in relationship to my message in specific, that choosing your partner is not just about choosing your attraction level and choosing what attributes they have that fit you. You want to make sure you understand where they come from in their representation and in their life experience, because if you can't connect with that experience and understand it from a place of empathy, how could you ever empathize and understand with your child having half of that experience? Peace.